Welcome everyone to the podcast. This episode I have with me Yvonne Alston. Yvonne, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Joe, how are you today?
I'm doing well, doing well. Thank you so much for being here.
Cool. So glad to be on your podcast today. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you here. Let's start out with having you tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what you're involved in, and let the listeners get to know you a little bit.
Sure. So my name is Yvonne Alston. I am the founder and principal of Indelible Impressions Consulting, LLC. We are a diversity, equity, and inclusion organization out of Newington, Connecticut. And we're really just all about helping organizations and individuals realize their full potential. And we do that by driving DEI to advance higher performing cultures. We want to help people connect more deeply, right? And flourish just in this ever evolving society and world. And so that's what we're all about.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you said Connecticut. So do you have snow? You got snow on the ground up there?
Oh my gosh. So we just got hit with this crazy snowstorm just a day ago. And here in my town, we got about 18 inches.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, a lot of fun.
Oh, wow. Just when what we needed is more time indoors, right?
Right? Exactly.
So Yvonne, this is again, I am so, for lack of a better word, blessed and the people that are coming onto the show. This pandemic, I was talking to our mutual friend Chris Lynn today about the amazing conversations this pandemic has kind of forced, or not forced, but allowed me to have, not only on the podcast, but in general with people like yourself around D&I, and how it's really helped expand knowledge and growth around the subject and the topics. And I know you and I are going to talk about some exciting things today. And one of those things that we're going to start talking about, I love that you brought this up. It's something that we should talk about, is the topic of intersectionality. Remember how I told you I have problems pronouncing things? But yeah, let's start talking about that. I want to learn more.
Yeah.
I want to learn more about this from you. So let's chat.
Cool. All right. So intersectionality, some people have thought for quite some time that it's more like a buzzword of sorts, right? That you just hear everybody talking about. But if we kind of take it back to basics, intersectionality was a phrase that was first introduced in around late 1980s. I want to say 1988 or 89 by Kimberly Crenshaw. She was a civil rights activist, a legal scholar, and it really focused on the fact that Black women in particular had greater discriminatory and marginalized experience, not alone due to the total sum of racism and sexism. And so, even thinking about, for example, Merriam-Webster's definition that kind of takes it down a couple notches, is really about like the accumulation of the effects of multiple forms of discrimination. When we think about those, that's racism, sexism, classism, all of the isms, right, that combine and overlap and intersect, especially in the experience of marginalized individuals and groups. And so it is that layering that occurs within individuals that then has quite a heaviness and impact to their overall experiences. And so the discrimination, the marginalization is so much greater the more layers that you have. And so it's these layers that contribute to part of the strong systemic oppression and discrimination that we see and people are talking about today.
There's so many questions were going off in my head. I told you in our first conversation, I a lot of time have grenade brain on these shows. I asked this question to one of my guests that came on regarding LGBTQ community and some of the challenges that they face or still facing. Why why are we still getting this wrong, right?
Mm.
Why is this still as large of an issue as it is? And when I'm talking, and specifically, why is racism still rampant? Why are we still dealing with this? I mean, we're a progressive society, right?
There's a question on the end of that,
Yeah,
right?
right. Exactly. So what, I guess the question, just to kind of narrow it down, is what are some factors that are allowing this to continue?
Oh boy. So, I mean, we can't deny, I think that socioeconomic conditions certainly play a large factor into that. Colonization as well, right? You hear people talking more about decolonization these days. And really what that's about is that, as we know historically, that it's believed that there is a Eurocentric overarching control of our society, right? Dating back to Christopher Columbus and all of that. So you have that, the dynamic that white society is prevalent, it's powerful, it is predominant. And so therefore you have this, I'm trying to think of the best way to kind of say this as not to throw off your listeners too much, but just basically that this is rife for discrimination that we've seen go on for 400 years. And as much as we would like to think that we've evolved as a society, when it comes to power and privilege, we really have not. And so that's a big factor, I feel, as to why there's still so much discrimination. And you're seeing it play out in so many different areas of life, right? You can't even turn on the news or the TV without seeing it play out in our streets, in policing. You see it play out within organizations, and what we're seeing in terms of either high-level African American and Black executives leaving companies because of mistreatment and lack of diversity, as much as you're seeing other companies and the higher levels, the boards and so forth, being kind of called to the carpet for having lack of diversity within their organizations. And then you also have everyday people speaking out about the inequities overall as it relates to pay equity, abilities, and lack of accommodations for people who may have some challenges when it comes to abilities, LGBTQ rights. And then I'll speak to my own experience, certainly as a cisgender Black woman, and all of the layers of my own intersectionality, and certainly the discrimination that I've experienced just in daily life as well as in the workplace. And I think that's why we still are having these conversations. But certainly the murder of George Floyd put it on the front burner, right? It was always there, it was always getting ready to bubble over. But I dare say that the George Floyd murder kind of put it right up under people's noses in a really undeniable way. And what you're seeing now is a collective reaction of society, both here in the United States and even abroad.
I want to stay with the society side for a minute. We're going to get to intersectionality in the workplace. I have several questions around that. But over the past, I'm going to say week, on LinkedIn and my social media feeds, I've been seeing posts on around George Floyd and the movement that it created about it starting to fizzle. And I'm torn on the ones that the posts that I'm seeing, because in a sense I feel that, right, that the movement isn't as in focus as it was maybe socially, but the overall movement that it created, like the companies are still begging for inclusion and how to do it. The fastest growing executive position right now in the US is a DE&I person, right? Is a chief diversity officer, right? So I see the sense of it almost not being talked about as much in circles, but I feel like there is somewhat of a lasting impact there. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I think, could it be that society has become so anesthetized to what happens over and over again that it's impactful for the moment, but then it's fleeting until the next one happens and the next one
Yeah.
happens and the next one happens,
Yeah.
right? And so because it continues to occur throughout various parts of this country, I think that people just, they get over it,
Yeah.
quite frankly, is what it is because we understand now that this has become a norm. What was so shocking, I think, about George Floyd was not only the fact that it was, videotaped for the whole world to see, but I think also the fact that there were other officers standing around who did not respond, that the callousness of the officer's hands in his pockets with his knee on someone's neck, who was literally begging for their life. I think that it was just a shock to the system of many Americans who had previously kind of read about this and knew about it, but just so easily turned a blind eye. But this time, that's not the case. But now here we go, a couple months pass, and it's like, okay, yeah, that happened. We recognize it. And there was all this flurry of outrage and everyone kind of speaking out about it. And then it just faded to the background, like many things do.
Yeah.
And add to the fact that we have a very volatile election year
Yeah.
that was going on that really took front and center this fall as well. So I do see the reality of why it's not being discussed as much in social circles, but there is a resounding effect that's happening in the corporate world, certainly, and within organizations, as you noted, that it has increased the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I agree with you that some companies are really hungry for it and passionate about it.
Mm.
And we can't deny the fact that some companies are just responding,
Mm.
right,
Yeah.
to
Mm.
this bandwagon that they want to jump on because they're concerned about their brand image.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are those two kind of subsets, right? And
Yeah,
I think people like you and I, when we start having those conversations, we can kind of identify that pretty fast. So I just wanted to ask, your thoughts on that. I knew, you would have some great insights on that. I want us to go back though to intersectionality, and I want to bring it into the workplace, right? So
yeah,
this is a term that I don't hear a lot in the workplace. So when I don't hear about it a lot, working with very large corporations and in their HR and across their enterprise, if I don't hear it, that lets me know they're not educated on it and they don't understand it.
yeah,
So let's talk about that, right?
sure.
What do these leaders need to know and understand about this term, and how, once they get that knowledge and education, how can they maximize it? How can they utilize it to create inclusion?
Right. Well, I
I
think
know
what
that's
they
a big
need.
question.
That is a really big question. So let me see if I can unpack that a little bit. I think what's really important is to understand that just like we are all individuals in our makeup and our DNA, we
Mm.
are the same in terms of our overall experience.
Right.
So, for example, you are a white male, right? And your experiences as you go through life, depending on how you grew up, what your socioeconomic conditions are, what your religious beliefs are, perhaps, as well as all the other different levels of identity that you hold within yourself. That is at the core intersectionality. And that's what guides your experiences. It also guides how you're seen in the world and how
Mm.
people engage with you in the world. Same thing for myself as a cisgender Black woman who is also a Christian, who grew up in challenging socioeconomic conditions, but now is considered middle class, who is physically able bodied for the most part. That has its own experiences,
Right.
right? But when you're looking at particularly the marginalized and the oppressed, so for me, not only am I gender-based a woman, right? I am cisgender. I am seen as such. I identify as such. That in itself, as we know, has its own set of oppression, right? There's its own set of marginalization rather that occurs for women. But then you layer in that I'm a Black woman and everything that also comes with that. And so, in those very layered experiences, it's really important for leaders to understand that this not only shapes how we engage with others, but how others engage with us. And that what that compounded experience feels like, looks like, and that we have to wade through on a day-to-day basis. You already have discrimination in the workplace, right? For women when it comes to pay inequities, right? Opportunities to get to certain levels, to have seats in certain rooms. Then you layer in the Black female experience into that, and that opportunities go way down, right? And so it's really important, I think, for leaders to understand what that looks like and how much more important it is to look at the marginalized and the oppressed, understand the various layers of that and what needs to be done on the home front to ensure that there are equitable opportunities for all, that there really is truly diversity throughout the organization, and not just diversity in terms of we're increasing our number of Black and Brown people at various levels within the organization, right? Because there's so many different attributes to diversity. And I feel like a lot of times people just focus on the external and they check that box like, okay, we've got, 2 Black men and 1 Black woman in leadership. Got it, done. Diversity, woohoo, we're all done.
I see I hear diversity defined like that so often.
And there's so much more to it than that.
There is. It is mind-boggling how broad diversity really is. I use the example all the time of a time where I was working with a sales organization in a company, and optically, right? That's the term I use a lot. Very diverse, based off race, ethnicity, gender, and so on. But when you looked at their resume, their background, they all went to Ivy League schools. They also they all worked for the same company, held some of the same positions throughout their 10, 15 years of sales. Noticeable lack of innovation and thought, life experience. Most of them grew up in the Southeast. Some of, I think out of the team of 8 that we were looking at, 6 of them grew up in the same state. Right.
Wow.
So, it's just, is that for all intents and purposes a diverse team? In my mind, no, that's not what, well, that's not what we're looking at or shooting for here. And what I want us to do is we talked a little bit about the leader experience and what they need to understand. But one of the things that drove me to this field for my profession is talking to people on my teams and just within organizations that I worked with, and started to understand that many of them, especially from a diverse nature or background, didn't feel like they could be who they were, or they had to be someone different, or I'm leaving this organization because I can't be who I want to be. We know there's a term for that, right? And I think that's something that we should spend some time talking about it. And I'm going to let you jump in here, but I want to know what you would say to someone in an organization that's feeling that way. And just give them some advice on, hey, this is what this is. And this is how, these are some of the things you can work with your organization to help overcome this.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yes, Absolutely. So what we're talking about essentially is what we know as code switching, right? So a lot of people, especially I would say in the Black community, are very familiar with this term. And basically at its core, it's really just impression management, right? So meaning that we adjust how we present ourselves in the workplace and in other areas of life, so that our presence is essentially more digestible and acceptable to others. This often entails our manner of speaking, could go to hairstyles, clothing, mannerisms. It's just making more people more comfortable with our Blackness so that we can fit in. And it is incredibly weighty, incredibly challenging, incredibly frustrating. And I will say, as a Black woman who grew up in some oppressive socioeconomic conditions, I grew up in a predominantly Black environment. And that experience, there was a certain amount of comfort there in terms of how we talked, how we engaged, and so forth. But we were all pretty clear that when we got into other environments, we couldn't be that. We had to be something else that was more acceptable to the masses, more acceptable to the standard. And the standard historically has been non-Black. It has been Eurocentric, predominantly white, right? And so for that then told us how to behave,
Right.
how to engage, how to look, to be seen a certain way so that we could have certain opportunities. And so I would say when it comes especially to the workplace, which is probably where I have found most challenging as a Black woman to move within that space, certain other areas of society, but I would say the workplace, right, is probably one of the most challenging, is how do I go into it trying to be all of who I am, liking who I am and what I have to bring to the table, but knowing that I have to leave certain parts of me at the door, or tamper down and minimize certain aspects because of how it would be perceived and how that could link to a stereotype in someone's head, and that I would be thus judged, and that my career could potentially be impacted by essentially being myself. So I'll give you an example of something, right? One morning, I woke up thinking, about what I was going to wear in the office on a beautiful summer day. And I looked at my wardrobe and I instantly started thinking about my choices, right? And I love clothing. Love clothing. So I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, definitely a dress. And as soon as I started looking at the dresses, I started instantly thinking about perception and bias.
Wow.
In my wardrobe, as a Black woman, I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, has to be conservative enough because as a Black woman, I have to be taken seriously. So I've got to think about that. And it can't be too low cleavage area or too short because as a Black woman, we're often, objectified and sexualized. Can't be too bright because then I'm going to stand out and I'm already tall and I have short hair and I'm Black. So I need to ensure that I fit in because I'm the only Black woman on any of my teams.
Wow. All of that
And
just to get dressed in the morning.
just to get dressed in the morning, right? And then as I'm walking in, right, I'm cognizant of, okay, like I'm listening to my upbeat music, but I know how that can be perceived. So I got to make sure I turn down the volume of my music before I get on premises, because then all of a sudden people will think like, oh, is that Yvonne? And oh, she's bumping her music. Oh, isn't that typical of Black people, right?
Yeah.
Then as I get into the office and how I engage and good morning, how are you, and so forth, I'm not using what used to be known as Ebonics or African American vernacular, right? I might see some other Black women and I might want to say, hey, girlfriend, how you doing today? But I have to be mindful of where I'm at.
Yeah.
And how that can be perceived. And so all these things we are constantly thinking about how we have to change and alter ourselves in the workplace to accommodate the environment and to be seen, hopefully, as equal to our non-Black counterparts, being taken as seriously as our non-Black counterparts, being seen as intellectual as our non-Black counterparts, and worthy of opportunity and ascension just as our non-Black counterparts.
Yeah. Every time. So I've had several conversations similar to this, and for me, white male, living in the Southeast, grew up in the Southeast. It's hard for me to wrap my head around sometimes that somebody goes through this on a daily basis. But it does, right? Because you hear the stories. Right? I could not imagine starting my day out like, I mean, well, my day's a little different. I work from home. I mean, it's business up top, party on the bottom with sweat. But
Right.
if I were in a situation like that, I just to have to think like that, I don't know what that I can't grasp that, right?
And you know what? You hit the nail on the head there with that,
Yeah,
Joe, because that is a part of privilege.
yeah,
And it's interesting. So when we start to get into the dynamics and discussions around privilege and power, that's a key component of it, right?
yeah.
I remember having a conversation, an enterprise-wide conversation with one of my previous CEOs, and he had no concept of
Yeah.
privilege. He thought it was, I make this much money, so I get to live in this kind of neighborhood, drive this kind of car, go on vacations wherever I want to go, and order the most expensive bottle of wine at a restaurant. He had no idea that at its most fundamental level, privilege is the fact that you get to wake up every day and not think about it.
Yeah.
You
Right.
get to be you and walk into spaces 100% with all that you are, and you don't think about it. Perhaps maybe you think about it if you're the only one in that environment, you probably would think about it. Or if there's very few of you around, you probably would think about it. But other than that, it's not something that you have to consider the
Yeah.
minute you get in the bed or you get in the mirror or you're leaving the house. I have to think and worry about that for my Black husband and my Black daughter, about what their experiences are when they walk outside of the safety and the acceptance of this house, how they're perceived, what their experiences might be that might be hurtful, but
Yeah.
also what experiences they could have that literally could cost them their lives. That weight
Mm.
is incomprehensible to so many people. And that's another reason why leaders have to be attuned to that kind of stuff. You can't leave it to HR. You need to know that, and you need to figure out the right way to engage with folks that are having those experiences,
Right.
understanding them at a greater, deeper level, and making sure that your work environments are sensitive to that and are more embracing of those differences, champion those differences, and make sure that there's equity of opportunity despite those differences.
Yeah. I think this is absolutely. Uh, I think this is absolutely something that companies need to start championing.
Yeah.
Really putting into place and addressing, because I can't think of one industry, one company that I haven't heard this in, right? That to some degree. I was talking to a colleague about 4 days ago about the behaviors that she's experienced in her career as a Black woman. She'll hear things like, "Well, I had no idea you were Black. You're so articulate." Well, what does that mean?
Been
What
there,
does that
done that.
mean?
Yep.
I could not, again, and this goes back to the privilege, and just I will never have these types of experience. I mean, I obviously don't sound like the most articulate person on the planet, but no one will ever say that to me, right?
You're
you
fine.
know, so but I couldn't imagine like hearing that,
Mhm.
and you know, or even, and when we talk about gender, her and her husband will be out, and they're both tall. All right, her husband's very tall. I think he's close to 7 foot.
Woo.
He's he's a law he no he's a judge. He's a judge, and they'll be out together, and they'll share the story how they met and stuff like that. That like for a couples outing or whatever, and they'll assume they both played basketball, especially the husband,
Yeah.
right? And like, yeah, well, so you must have played. And it's like, no, I got like my undergrad online, and but her, my friend, Ivy League school, played. Oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it. I can't think of the name of the sport with the ball and you throw it with
Oh,
the
lacrosse.
lacrosse. That's it.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
it. And she was captain of the lacrosse team, right? And
Wow.
but those aren't the assumptions.
No.
Those aren't,
No.
and I think it's that type of behavior that continues to make uh you know people of race and ethnicity feel this way and feel like they have to have these conversations in their head because it's obviously happening enough to modify their behavior that way, to modify you in the behavior of I have to literally sit here and think about, well, I can't wear the sundress because I may look like this or put off.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think, and let's take a couple more minutes on this. What can leaders do to help with this? Right? What do
Yeah.
they? I mean, what message do they need to put down besides, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
stop doing it"? Because I mean, if
Right.
it's that easy, right?
Right.
But how do they start? You know?
I think when leaders are telling, their teams and, I think senior level leaders within their organizations, and when they say, we are championing an environment where everyone can bring their whole selves to work, you've got to kind of define that, right? Because I think what has happened is we've normalized Eurocentricity in such a way that that has become the whole self to work, right? And we think about it in terms of maybe soft skills, but not so much in terms of physically how we show up.
Right.
But there's certain allowances that are made, right, for creative folks. And I remember seeing a previous organization where, you could have the pink hair, maybe the nose ring, maybe you could wear some funky socks or something like that, right? But when it comes to um, other ethnicities, what does that look like? Can a Southeast Asian woman, someone of that descent, can they wear their traditional garments? Can someone who may of African descent wear a head wrap or something else that's symbolic of their culture? Do they have to ascribe to these other sets of norms that are considered what is acceptable versus who they really are? And so I think that corporate organizations need to clearly define that. And maybe even it's through internal campaigns that they run through HR and some of the ERGs of like, this is what showing up looks like, allowing people to articulate what that is, to say, what does it mean for somebody like Yvonne Alston to show up to work and be herself and not have to worry about code switching or those things? I would dare say, you know what that sounds like? Or that looks like? That looks like me being able to high five anybody that I see and say, yes, sis, hey, and
I
talk
love
to
my
them in the same way I would talk to a friend. Exactly, right? Or shave the side of my hair, which I did only after I left corporate because I felt like that I wouldn't be taken seriously. And that would have been a little bit too edgy and typical of Black woman challenging style norms in the workplace, right? Um, and so I would say that I'm also kind of a jokester, and I would like to be able to showcase a little bit more of that part of my personality,
Yeah.
studying having to be stiff and stodgy and to be taken seriously. I would encourage leaders to even think about some reverse mentorships, right? Which I think are really important for getting kind of an ear to the ground about what's going on with people and who they are. Sitting in a room full of people from other cultures and saying, hey, what is your experience like? And I really want to know. You're not going to be penalized for this, there'll be no retaliation, but I want some real honest truth serum injected into leadership of this organization to say, what is it like to be you? What
Mm,
have you experienced? How is it that you have to change parts of yourself to be here every day and to engage? What is that like for you? And what would you like to see? Who would you like to be? What would you like this environment to be like so that you can come and bring your whole self to the organization
yeah.
and really thrive and succeed here? Because honestly, there's nothing worse than having to go in and be somebody that you are not
Yeah.
and leave that at the door and then try to pick that up on your way back home or wherever else you're going to your communities that do accept you. It's just, they need to start to really dig into that a little bit more,
Yeah.
have those really necessary, courageous, critical conversations,
Yeah.
and then put um, tactics and employments in place that actually move the culture forward in terms of acceptance.
Mm. How do you feel
So
about
that we
that? Do you feel optimistic that companies, they're going to get it? I mean,
I don't
are we
know.
moving in the right direction, or will we be moving in the right direction? I mean, we
I
can't
think we
fix this
can.
ourselves, right?
No, no. I think it starts at the top.
Mm,
I'm gonna say, I think it's not only diversifying leadership, because that's one aspect. And again, when I say diversifying leadership, I'm not talking about, very clear to your listeners, not just putting more brown and black folks in leadership, right?
right.
But truly diversifying leadership in all the ways that we are diverse so that we have those conversations happening at critical decision making tables,
Yeah.
both internally and externally. Um, I think you got to get to people's hearts as much as you get to their heads.
Mm, yeah.
Because it's one thing to have a head knowledge of this stuff, it's another thing, I think, to feel it,
Yeah.
right? For them to understand how very personal and heavy and weighty this is, so that they can start to say, okay, I don't have these issues, but I've got to make this better. And it's critical that I do this. Um, I think that until we get to that place, I think it's going to be really hard. I mean, we can just keep championing as much as we do as DEI strategists. And as we're talking to different organizations and getting in there and doing this work and kind of shaking those trees, if you will, um, to for change. I think it really does. For me, I would say it's a heart change that needs to occur at the highest level of the organizations for people to feel the
Yeah.
pain and the hurt of others and to
Mm,
take empathy to a whole nother level, to where you'll start to see that trickle down in
yeah.
policies and processes. And I think also allowing some people at the table when it comes to HR initiatives, to not just have the same old folks going ahead and putting out campaigns and initiatives, but for them to also, folks in HR and HR leadership, to understand a little bit more of what these experiences are and how to promote that. I would love to see, rather than everyone smiling in photos around a corporate office and they're all kind of cookie cutter in a way, is to start seeing them embracing Black women with braids and
Yeah.
various ethnocentric hairstyles and manner of dress,
Yeah.
to embrace, as you see couples, what that really looks like in organizations, that it's not just heterosexual, same race couples,
Yeah.
but seeing that mix of what our world really looks like.
Yeah.
I think those are some of the things that you can start to do and see to push change within the workplace.
Yeah. I think too, I wish we could take away some of the terms that we have in our field, our industry here, and almost
Mm,
replace it with, cultural mastery, or cultural understanding. Because I think that's what these leaders and change makers need to understand, that your company is a culture of different cultures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to become. So I connected with someone, a guy by the name of Ricardo Gonzalez, earlier this year, and he champions that term, culture mastery. He wrote this amazing book
Mm,
about it.
love it.
Um, but it is understanding, even though you can't physically or even maybe mentally or in some cases socially identify with that culture, but you understand it as far as what their challenges are, what their likes, what their dislikes, their history, their languages, their symbols, right? And I think, when it comes to code switching, that is in a sense what you're doing is you're leaving your culture at home. You're leaving
Mm-hmm.
it on the nightstand, and you'll pick that up when you get home. And I really feel if organizations would look at it like, what, I'm a culture of cultures, and I need to understand these different cultures that are represented in my workforce. And I'll even go as far as do some analytics. Do some analytics. The
Yeah,
data's there. You have all the
absolutely.
information through the hiring process. Do some,
Yeah.
and then educate yourself, and then come up with curriculum to educate others and other leaders, and have that culture approach. Have those conversations. It doesn't do any good for my friend Summer to talk to me about what I
Mm-hmm.
interpreted as assault, but someone stroking her hair and saying, "I've always wanted to touch the hair of a black woman," right? I look at it as assault,
Mm,
but they need to hear that. I
yeah.
it hurts me to hear it. I can only do so much with it. That leader needs to hear it. So the employees, right? There's some onus on that to say, hey, look, I need to talk to you, manager 1 and 2, that I'm feeling this way. And I
Yep.
need us to work through it together. And I understand that you may not have the skill sets to work through this, but let's do it together. Now the onus is absolutely not fully on the employee base. That's absolutely not my point. But there has to be a marrying of the leaders need to understand, hey, I need to get down there and start listening to these conversations. I need to come to a Summer or to a Yvonne, and hey, what's your day like? What's your experience here? Right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And,
And for
and
us
they
to
need
feel
to be
free to give
ready
it.
for that. And they need to be ready for that critical knife
Yeah.
feedback. Because
Yeah.
I think as a society, and I think I'm going off on a rant here, so I'll stop soon. I think as a whole, we also got to get better at providing feedback as well as receiving it. We have to be, specific. We got to list the behavior, and we got to talk about the impact it had on us individually. And I think if these conversations are set up like that, I think that'll help with change. I do.
I do as well. I think it's creating that psychological safety
Yeah.
that's needed, right, in the environment so that people do feel like they can say that they can give their feedback without retaliation and,
Mm.
in
Yep.
some form or fashion. I just spoke with someone the other day who had indicated that he was asked about a reverse mentorship with a leader that's, top of the house for his organization. And within that, he was saying, I said to him, I was like, well, are you gonna tell her like exactly how it's been for you, what the experience has been like? And he was like, I don't know, like I don't know that she can receive that. And I'm worried because if I tell her what it's really like for me, then will she look at me differently? Will I not get that opportunity? Like I'm already talking to her about elevating. Like if all of a sudden I say, well, this is what my experience has been, maybe I won't be looked at for that opportunity anymore. And I was like, do you hear yourself?
Yeah.
And this is somebody that's, was is a personal friend of mine. And I said, I think back to the John Lewises of the world who
Oh
are
yeah.
willing to get their heads cracked open so that we could even be in the position that we're in today. We are the next generations of that. And we have to be able to say these things or nothing is going to really change. We have to tell them what it's really like for us
Yeah.
because they're not seeing it. So
Yeah.
we have to be brave enough, but have to feel that psychological safety in the environment that we can say this is really my lived experience when I'm within these walls. This is a discrimination that has either been felt or articulated. I mean, some of the things that I've had said in rooms that I've been in would be shocking. I remember having someone say to me at one point, like before I was in DEI, saying, you think you'd be really good in DEI? Would you want to explore that? And I remember thinking to myself, this was years ago. And I remember thinking, like, I never said anything to you about DEI. Like, why the assumption? Like,
Yep.
and then
But
I
you
was
know
like,
what,
very quickly, it was
yeah, it's
oh, yes. Okay. You'd
yeah.
be great in diversity, Yvonne.
Yep. No one's ever
Before
said that to me.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So this is what I'm talking about. I mean, and we could get in a whole conversation about
Oh yeah.
microaggressions and so forth,
Yeah.
but it's about being able to have those real conversations. But again, not for a leader to go in there like, okay, like I'm going in with knowing that I'm going to hear what I want to hear,
Yeah.
right?
That's it.
I have a set amount or silos of takeaways that I'm specifically looking for versus like I want to hear the truth of the experience. I want to hear the pain of the
That's it.
experience. I want to hear the challenges of the experience, good, bad, or indifferent. And I want to take that away and I'm going to do something about it. I'm not just going to listen, but there's going to be action that comes afterwards. It's going to make this environment better.
Yeah.
And I think the more that they do that, the more we will see change, and it'll be sustainable change, and it'll come to fruition much more quickly.
Yeah. And I'd like to see great point. And I think I would like to see leaders reach solutions with their employees, right? I have the conversation and just say, okay, I'm going to walk away and action it. I just learned about it, right? I want to come up with the solution together. Let's fix this problem. Our friend John Carlson, you know
Yes.
John, yes.
Yes, I know John
Making
very
sure.
well.
So one of his story is amazing. For any of the listeners, please connect with John Carlson. Um, he recognized the problem and he went to his leaders, right? The representation and the code switching that members of the LGBTQ community had to do in that organization. And he said, hey, this is the problem, but I'm going to solution it for you. Let's work on this together. If you meet me with this, I can do this. And they worked out a solution. I remember him telling me like it was over drinks or something that they come up with this solution together. And they gave him this insane amount of money as far as to start this initiative. And I just thought, how awesome would things be if all the D&I conversations in companies were like that, where you stated the problem, the leader listened, received, and then solutioned right there.
Yeah.
That's a perfect world, right? That's what that's what we say, right? And the reality of something like that being the norm is it seems impossible right now.
I think it's depending on the size of the organization.
Yeah.
And for me, I would say it goes back to the heart of the leader,
Yeah.
right? If they really do want to make change and they want to make change for the right reasons, because they really do want to change the culture of their organization, and they really truly want those who walk within their doors and within their businesses, they really want them to bring their whole selves, and knowing that the organization thrives better, there's more innovation, there's more problem solving, there's greater opportunity for expansion and new markets and all of the great attributes that come with a truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization, then that's the blueprint right there. But unfortunately, it's just not the norm. So then it becomes like, what can people like you and I do?
Yeah.
When we have the ears of leaderships, it's to talk to them, to make these recommendations to them of how they engage, that they come down from the ivory tower and they walk among the people and they actually have conversations with people and make it their mission to understand folks on a deeper level, and realize that they are part of the change that they need to see. That is not just HR's job.
Yeah.
Through the workforce. But also, back to one thing you said though, the employee part is really important. But the one thing I would say, and I would caution with that, is that as long as it's not tokenism,
Yeah.
right? Like we
Yeah.
know that happens a lot in organizations.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, well, Yvonne's Black, albeit she's a lighter version, but we know that she's Black. So let's go ask her.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm speaking for the entire, Black culture at the organization. And so I think we have to be careful with that too, in terms of that partnership with employees and leadership in terms of solutioning. Um, as long as there's diversity within the solutioning as well, and that we're not picking one person and all of a sudden assuming that this is a monolithic and this is everyone's Black person's experience, and so if we do this, this is a recipe for all across the board, then we'll be golden with all the Black people here at this organization.
Yeah.
Not so. I think you need a sampling. I think you need a safe space, whether that's through anonymous surveying or other tools and practices, in order to get that truth, and then decide what you're going to do with it. And then maybe to that point that you made of going back and kind of partnering with the individual, because they can help to socialize the change as well. You'll have your change ambassadors, right? That are going in and saying things and are willing to be upstanders versus bystanders. And
Yeah.
all of those aspects. You'll get people really in your camp looking to champion change along with the leader. And so you have it coming at both levels, right? That end up meeting in the middle. You've got the top down approach and you've got the bottom up. And so by the time you get to middle management, they're hearing it from above and they're getting it from their employees, and they're changing because they got nowhere else to go.
Yeah. I think that communication's key, right?
Yeah.
I think hearing that. Yvonne, I actually think that's a great way to close us out. I want to thank you. It's one of the things I've been super thankful for. I talked about this maybe before we even press record. Um, I have made some amazing connections, but even more amazing, the start of new friendships. And I absolutely feel that's where we are. So thank you so much. I want to give you the opportunity if anyone wants to learn more about Indelible Impressions, how can they connect? What links? What would you like to share?
Oh, thank you so much, Joe. Well, I appreciate being given the opportunity to be on with you today. And yes, we have become fast friends indeed. So thank you again. In terms of getting in touch with me, Indelible Impressions, you can visit the website at www.indelible-consulting.com, or you can email me directly at yvonne.alston@indelible-consulting.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. So by all means, get connected, and let's talk about all things DEI. Move the culture
Absolutely.
forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thanks.